Welcome to the Stoa. The Stoa is a digital campfire where we cohere and dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of what's happening now.
Okay, once again, welcome to the Stoa, a place for dialogue around what matters most at the knife edge of history. So, what I thought maybe we could do, spend 10 minutes if you are holding some insight or some powerful meaning you've been making about the trust exercise, or a question, or just something that seemed, that kind of surprised you. So let's just go to the quarter hour and see if we can share some of that, some of what you expected or didn't expect or were surprised by that exercise. And I have you all muted, so you can just unmute yourself to share.
I have no idea how relevant this is, Bonnitta. You asked at one point whether there was anyone that you would believe them even if you couldn't see it for yourself, right? And I put my hand up immediately to that because there is a person in my life who I absolutely would. And yet, that same person was not one of the first people that came to mind when I first started doing the exercise. So I don't know if that means anything, but that was something that struck me as odd at the time.
Yeah, you know, this is fun. We don't have to analyze everything, but that's interesting. That's an interesting data point.
Yeah, there's, when you talked about, you were looking at what people were saying, Bonnitta, and you said something about how if we have few people we can trust in that center circle as compared to the people in the outer circle, that system is fragile. And yeah, I've been feeling really connected to that, and looking at my, you know, I often will go, oh, like I have to reach out to these bigger, you know, and then I'm like, I don't see what I could be nurturing close to me. And I feel like there's patterns that have instantiated that. Needs to be important, or all kinds of, yeah, interesting stuff there.
Yeah, this is a kind of predicament we're in, because we're introduced to a lot of people we don't know by artifacts of their highest self, like a novel they wrote or a piece of academic writing. And these make them highly desirable trust points for us. And then the people next to us, we see them in all their glory. And that is both a challenge, but as someone said last time, it signals, if you figure it out, it signals an opportunity to deepen trust. And we tend to look at quantity. So if we're in business, for example, a lot of us are independent contractors. We are used to having a large Rolodex. And I think focusing on building a very strong small world network, and you can look up some cool interactives on small world networks and why they scale better than these kind of flat, either hub and spoke, or these flat kind of cross connections. So, so that's just something to think about. Again, I always want to remind myself that these are just variations. As I said, when I first started doing this about 7 years ago, I really thought I had a handle on what trust in the human system was. And it turns out there's many, many variations. So it's always about what feels right and speaks to you. But yeah, that's a good noticing.
Bonnitta, can I jump in on that?
Yes, please, Nate.
What you were just saying about many different kinds of trust, I've been noticing for the last, I think since the last session, about, we talked about all the different ways that we don't have to trust people because we get to trust in more abstractions like law or, you know, other institutions. And I've been noticing, well, I've been thinking about what would my life be like if I trusted, if I could find ways to engender more trust in the people that I'm close with. And also noticing how, in the absence of having to trust people for like food, survival, protection, things like that, I sort of default to ways of trust that feel really natural to me. And that makes me like select a certain kind of person that I trust. Like it's one of the reasons that I'm here listening to you talk and spending time at the Stoas, because I trust people who can express themselves in certain ways and see order and patterns in certain ways and can talk about that. But that means that I sort of default to trusting a certain kind of, I don't know, just way of expressing themselves. I select that, and I've been thinking about how I could find more ways to trust people more broadly and to trust people who make sense in different ways than I do, just to experiment with that, I guess.
Yeah, I think the point is that all of us interested in moving to a different kind of society, let's say a distributed economy or game B-ish type thing. This puts us right in front of one place where the work needs to be done, just to examine this on a more phenomenological level. You know, what is it to trust, and what are the different types of trust, and what kinds of trust networks do we need to pull off this, the future of the society we see? And there's a lot of, you know, we take it for granted that we can trust people who drive, for example, you know, that they're not going to run red lights and stuff like that. But we begin to think that the road is trustworthy because we have rules and laws and stoplights, when in fact, what's really cool is when the power goes down, you see people, they are an expression of the kinds of social dynamics and behaviors that we are as humans, pro-social dynamics. And so you see those crazy videos of traffic in Indonesia or India where there's like all this stuff and people are driving really fast, but they have a way that, you know, they know how to flow. So we don't want to go too far into thinking that people don't kill each other because the law, you know, because it's illegal. And there's a sense in which there's certain incentives for people in power, we're going to talk about power today, for us to think that that's why we don't kill each other, or that's why things work. In fact, in times of crises like this little one we're going through, it's the opposite. The large system has to decompose into these person-to-person type dynamics. So maybe we could talk about that another day. But yeah, that's a really good noticing. Anything else? Did anyone think about trusting nature? This is another place that we need to examine ourselves. There's this person, last name Chandler, wrote Ontopolitics in the Anthropocene. It's a horrible title because the book is much better than that. We talked about him the first day because he talks about hacking, tracking, and mapping. But he notes that we tend to have, as late modernists, even postmodernists, we tend to frame nature as predatory. So the Darwinian attitude, like if we weren't pushing back on nature all the time, it would kill us or something. And there's this book called, I'm so bad, something about killed by domesticity or something. And it's research on foraging societies, and you know, they're just half naked people that live in the jungle. And he's like, they're not afraid. They're not afraid that they're going to get eaten every single day. You know, they're not huddled around their campfire waiting for like a monster to come. That's what modern people do. We're huddled at home waiting for the virus to come. And it's really, you start to really examine some of these assumptions about who we are as a people and what we trust and what we do not trust. And yeah, so that's a whole nother place to go with the trust exercise. Civilized to Death. Yes, that's the book. Thank you very much. Yeah, when I read that, and I could see it, that I imagined, you probably can hear my dogs, sorry. Yeah, I imagined that was the case. And actually, when you look at that first impulse to huddle and be really afraid, this is in the medieval religions. So there's a famous cathedral in Trondheim that if you walk through, you can just see how this religion came from people feeling very, very insecure about their place in life. So that's another way to weave in your trust network, to trust that the earth can produce food, and that, you know, the hydrological cycles can be resilient and stuff like that. And so, yeah, that's a good kind of follow-up thing to think about.
Anita, can I just just express something that I'm thinking there? Seems to be this idea that, you know, don't worry, you can trust nature because it provides X, Y, and Z. To me, like, you can trust, like, trust isn't necessarily a always good thing. Like, trust being a function of capacity, reliability, and stuff. So I can trust a bad actor to always be bad in a certain way. So it's, I just don't want it to be that people have to find the good in everything they trust. I still think it's very, not only useful, but, well, useful and informative to actually trust in both sides of things, in the good, bad, and indifferent. I don't know, it's just popped up there as you were mentioning about.
Yeah, no, this is excellent. And maybe we don't have to map it strongly onto power, but it has something to do with power, you know? And like in organizations, when people complain about their supervisor or their boss, and they're like, well, whatever we do, he's going to be against it, or she's going to be against it. Trust a thief to steal, exactly. But what I say is that's no problem, because you can trust, you know, you can just operationalize that. It's predictable. It actually reduces some of the complexity. The worst supervisors are the ones that are just like the worst parents. They're so disconnected. It's this one day and that, you know, and that can create, you know, that can really drive you crazy. But yeah, you can trust. The law, one of the reasons why nature is trustworthy is because many of the laws in nature are quite predictable. Not all of them, but you can trust that certain very large animals are going to behave in some ways and not others, and things like this. And so we need to, even that is cool to try to, is to honor that aspect of nature. And one of the things that I teach in my course is, whenever, you know, eventually the question of free will comes up in my course, and it's a really big rabbit hole. And I use a metaphor based on process philosophy, and that is that agency is a participation of promise and possibility. So I say, if the rock did not promise to lie upon the earth, I could not pick her up and throw it. So the laws, which seems like determinism, that hold the rock and gravity together, actually create a kind of agency. And if those of you that saw Dave Snowden yesterday, he would say it's an enabling constraint. So if you could, and you start to see a lot of things turned around. So for example, we think of gravity as the limiting condition for flight. But actually, without gravity, flight itself would not be possible. So you start to see there's always a partnership between predictability, which is an enabling constraint for other possibilities. And that predictability is where that trust comes in, that some of where that you're speaking to. So, yeah. Cool. All righty. Excellent. It's always encouraging when there's stuff going forward into the next session. Okay, today we're going to talk about power, and let's just get some ideas. Is that horribly disturbing, or is it just okay? It's okay. Okay.
It's fine.
Let's get some ideas of how power manifests in your life. Is it like, do you think about it? Power. Oh, the dogs are fun. Power, like power. Let's just say something about power. Do you feel empowered? Do you feel disempowered? Do you feel like you have a lot of power? Are you postmodern about power? Is power patriarchal? What's in our consciousness about power?
Well, I feel like power is sometimes very counterintuitive. That like when I feel myself most wanting to control things and like get a grip on the situation, I feel most unempowered. But when I guess that's a way that it's related to trust. When I trust in like the process or that everything will unfold the way it should, I feel more empowered. So that's my immediate thought.
Mm-hmm.
I quite like the framing they give to power in the Game of Thrones, right? Where power is where people believe it is. Yeah, power is where people look for it.
Ah.
I'm at the Monastic Academy, and I believe they define power as the ability to hold your own perspective and then also get other people to do what you want.
Uh-huh.
In the Liminal Space Agency, we often talk about how there's different kinds of power or concepts of power. The sort of coercive power to make things happen, make people do things, and then just going up a level to just power being the capacity to influence what's happening.
Yeah, so there's coercive, coordinated, cooperative, collaborative, and co-creative. We might get to that that series. Anything else? You know, the
first thing that popped in my head was the word alignment. It's being in alignment with something, and also fully embodying that you're aligned with.
Okay. Yeah, it has something to do with agency.
There's a distinction between doing what you have to do for others. Like men are often powerful because they're trying to satisfy other people's needs rather than their own internal needs. This can be true for anybody. But power coming from the ability to satisfy and meet your own goals rather than somebody else's, even though that looks powerful.
Yeah, intrinsic versus extrinsic power, self-authored power versus reactive power, is a different way to say, is a different thing, but similar. And then money as power, come up to the chat room here. Okay, anything else?
I experience power as the ability to be with whatever and remain and not disappear.
Ah, and remain. Yeah, how do we experience power?
Yeah, I think of it as opportunity to impact things that have a will of their own. And that could be a system, another person, or even parts of your own psyche.
Yeah. Okay, so we're getting really close. So I want you to write something down. And this is the source code formula for power, or one. We could see if it's powerful or if it has some limitations. Power equals, well, power, first the definition of power I'm going to work with is the flow of force. So there's a direction. Power is always relative to movement in a certain direction, and some of you talked about that. And again, this could be internally psychological. So if I'm reactive, then the flow of force is from my unconscious drives to my behaviors, right? So power is not a static thing. It's related to a flow of force. And we're interested in what direction that flow is. Power can only be experienced if it flows from more power to less power, or else you wouldn't use the term power. And now I want you to write power equals skills and resources divided by needs and wants. Okay, so if I'm standing in a path in the woods and a bear comes toward me, then I'm going to experience a power gradient based upon my skills and resources divided by my needs and wants relative to the bear's skills and resources divided by its needs and wants. So if I have a gun in my hand, that's a resource, and I know how to use it, then I might feel powerful relative to a bear who's equally startled as I am and just wants to walk off into the wilderness despite his larger, powerful body. But if I don't have the skills, the resource of a gun, or the skills to run faster than the bear, and the bear has the big, powerful body and wants to protect her cub from me, then we have a different power equation. Now, the difference between skills and resources, needs and wants, are skills and needs are used up all the time. You employ your skills to solve, you employ your skills, and needs are constantly arising. I need to pee, I need to eat, I need this. Whereas resources and wants are aggregated, like I have money in the bank, I have lots of guns, or someday I want to have a new house. So resources are skills that build up by applying skill over time, and wants are needs that are scale over time. Does that make sense? Okay, so when you think of, now this is, what's interesting about this is this explains a lot of the phenomenology of power. If I am a young college student female, heterosexual, and I walk into the pub, and this great big looking, really attractive guy is kind of like on his game, I may feel transgressed upon just because maybe I need him to like acknowledge me, or and he's just because he's got more skills and resources, less needs and wants. He doesn't care anything about me, but I'm psychologically, emotionally, and maybe even sexually moved. He is moving me, right? So power is who gets to move who. And so just by a certain presence, a person can psychologically move another person, and you will feel that they're exercising power, whether they are thinking about it or not, because you're moved by someone else who's moving you. This is often a big insight for not only women, but for men who, don't understand why the world reacts to them the way they do, because they just exude power, and that's a good thing. But they don't understand that force will flow based upon this power formula. This is also the shadow in a lot of relationships with funders. Very hard for them to become your peer because they have more resources than you. So there's always a power flow. There's always the felt sense of power, the flow of force that is pretty much inescapable. Now, as this formula works, of course, many of us, when we feel disempowered, we work really hard at improving skills and building resources. But in our world today, it is often the case that our needs and wants grow faster than that. And this is underlooked. This is underlooked. The exponential growth of our needs and wants continually disempowers us. And then we project that onto an aggressor. So when I saw Occupy kids, the Occupy movement, give us free this, give us free that, it's completely disempowering. And anyone with power just knows it, just feels it. They're completely disempowered. So one of the greatest ways to work with power, if you feel disempowered or you feel you don't have power, what are the needs and wants that are disempowering you? And literally, like the story of the Taoist who had to meet, the Taoist who didn't know how to use a sword had to meet the samurai on the bridge. And he went to the guru, and the guru said, don't do anything. Just be prepared to die. Just reduce your need to live to zero. And that's what he did. And the samurai felt like, oh my God, I'm not going to try to strike him. He has too much power, right? So literally, this is part of the equation. This is part of the equation. When you look at coercion in modern society, be careful, because coercion can arise because the person at the bottom of the power equation has too many needs and wants. And not that the person on the other side is exercising too much skills or resources. I feel coerced to do this by my husband. Why? Because he'll get mad if you don't? That's not necessarily coercion. It's more complex than that. It's most often the case because you can't self-regulate your ability to endure the fact that he's going to have a tantrum like a 2-year-old. So that's your need and want. to not have that feeling that he's mad, and your lack of the skill to self-regulate that feeling. It's also why there are passive aggressive forms of power, which leverage the other person's needs and wants. It's this form of power. Yeah.
I have a question. I think about this a lot, actually, in terms of the multiplication of needs and wants. But I'm wondering if there's a flip side to it, where people say something like, you're not living up to your potential. Why do you want so little for yourself? How do I make sense of that?
Yeah. So potential is not the same with need and want. Your potential for what? To be creative, your potential to be happy, your potential to be what, you know, versus your potential to, you know, consume a lot of stuff based upon needs, or the need to have external affirmation about your life. Yeah.
I have a question. I guess the natural thing to ask then is, how does one reduce or control one's needs and wants? I'm reading a lot of Lacanian psychology right now, so I'm where he's talking about the lost object of desire that we're kind of all hoping for, but it's not a defined object. It's a really like obscure, and so that was just a thought.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk around it and then we can deepen it, because I think you're asking a deeper question, but I think to give you some flavor of just the formula, we'll start at a higher place, more surface place. So I ran a landscape design, build, and contracting company for many years. And we worked for the rich and famous. And all of us loved to do beautiful landscapes and out here in Northwest Connecticut. And the rich and famous would come and buy, you know, 75 acres and have all these ideas. And, you know, we would compete with other designers to get those projects. And every once in a while, the salespeople would come, like the designers would come, and they would be really excited. Oh, I'm going to get it. I'm going to get it. I'm like, be careful. You want this project more than the client. And that means you're just going to cut costs until you're going to do either a lousy job or you're not going to be able to finish it, you know? And so a lot of times it's really working with yourself psychologically. So it's a tricky thing, you know, you want to acknowledge that you want that job, but you have to get some sense of base reality of when is it diminishing reality in a case, you know? And so this happens a lot when we chase after, I mean, the whole marketing and consumerism is built to increase our needs and wants. And, you know, you have to get really kind of try to make sense, get very practical. Like the Quakers. The Quakers are not against technology. They are trying to be reasonable. So if you say, well, you know, it takes a lot of time to get into town. If we bought a car, we could get into town faster. But then they reason, well, if we bought a car, then we'd have to sell more goods. And at the end of the day, they realize that the initial need to get into town faster is not satisfied by that, method. So they don't. But they're interested in solar power because it seems to satisfy the need of having more time to be contemplative and to do community stuff. So so then what is the need to have the car? It's not a need to satisfy the original desire. It's kind of looped around some other kind of need. So and a lot of times when you do this work, you say, I do it myself. I'll say, the need is just manufactured. Like, okay, here's one. I don't have a smartphone. I don't like them. I think you work for your smartphone. Your smartphone doesn't work for you. And so, yeah, so it creates a certain type of liberation. It's hard when you travel to Europe and you don't know where you're going, but then you depend upon other people, but then you can't speak the language, so it gets really funny, stuff like that. But I really, really want the new Microsoft Duo, you know, the thing that opens up like a book, right? Like, because it's like a book. And I want it so bad. And I'm already telling myself it's not even out yet. And I'm already trying really to, you know, no, don't get it. Don't get it. Don't get it, you know? And so you can see, I can feel that moving in me. Look at the way I do this. I mean, like, I want it so bad. So, you know, and sometimes you say, yeah, I'm just going to get it, you know? You don't always like, it's not necessarily that you don't do, you know, the completely rational thing or something like that. Yeah, it's like a Rube Goldberg, and so, and it's not about just being efficient. You know, we don't want to, we do a lot of things like grind your own coffee and make it, you know, because there's a lot of value and beauty in that, and we can really enjoy it. So it's not about efficiency, but it's just about coming to terms with what's driving this equation, especially when you're in a situation where you're going to have to work with someone where the power, there's a power, there's a flow of force, either as authority or supervisor or yeah. So like in coronavirus, where my local community, not my online community, is pretty skeptical about how serious it is. We think it's a thing. But what we noticed is then we get really mad because the government has power over us and can tell us to stay home. And then you can't do anything about it. So, but you can ameliorate your need not to have the government tell you what to do. You know, it can cycle. So then you can kind of like position yourself in between what's going on in a way that, yeah. So when you're fighting against the fact that the government has power over you, you're disempowering yourself even more. So how can I reclaim my sovereignty in the face of something I can't really do anything about or don't want to do anything about? I don't want to, you know, like those people did, take my gun into the State House and make a ruckus. So it's always kind of balance. It's a balancing act between both those things.
Is it possible to store this potential energy? So for instance, in Corona, you have a situation where you can't do anything about it. And what you're suggesting is sort of cut off your needs and wants, which is very interesting, because in a way it's a very retreat mode approach to life, is my sense to it. We are sort of not even trying to build our skills. We are saying, you know what, the grapes are sour because I can't have them. That's the flavor I get. And instead, why not sort of take that feeling of maybe frustration or disempowerment and transform that towards, maybe I can't do anything now, but 5 years down the line, I don't want to be in a similar context. How do you apply it? Because I don't see how we can sort of say, okay, fine, if everyone decides to do the thing like Quakers are doing, we would not even have the technology move forward, right? So what's your comment on that?
Yeah, okay, so that's perfect. So now you understand why it's skills and resources divided by needs and wants, because I can turn the needs I can't satisfy today, and I can work on resources that'll be helpful in the future. And then I bump up my want. I don't need the government to do anything different today, but what I want is a new type of conversation. You see the difference? So now, and that's how those two categories move. They're both you work on them more in the future. And I think that's what you said, stored potential. Resources and wants are stored potentials. I want a more beautiful world our heart knows is possible, right? So I move that into this, so I can always, so I'm trying to build a sort of other type of potential. And then if I move my need to a want, then I see, well, what kind of resources do I need for that kind of want? And so the conversation switches, but it's in that formula. Because you can't just want and then say, well, I want this, and then you have to then, if you move into a want, you have to build future resources. So you start to do things like this, right? This is building future resources.
Yeah, I'm getting how the letting go of the need, want in the moment can free up, like my system will be less anxious, disempowered, and I would be able to potentially think more laterally, into space and time, the future, as you're pointing out, or maybe there are other people that I can connect with that have the skills and resources, or I'm getting that.
Yeah, one's more of a potential built up, and another is, but they move back and forth, depending upon context, and needs can draw off of resources, and skills can build up want. So they're not just packaged, but they're all, they're like the four sides of the equation. And the thing is, we're not guaranteed to, if power is who gets to move who, we're not guaranteed to be the mover. It's not assured. But this gives us more, I think, conceptual distinction, or the source code to really examine these things a little more closely. And, also, one of the things we started about, one of the benefits of working with source code is we're not fighting about, we're not at the point where Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris talk about power. It's already way too complex and filled with projections and all this, like the territory is too complex. Can we come back down to something that can be sourced by a feeling, a phenomenological feeling in our body, who gets to move who? Even if I move psychologically or mimetically, this disempowers me. If I'm on the internet and my limbic system's like this, I'm constantly disempowered. If I can be on the internet and have it work for me, right? Because I want to understand the information ecology, that's a completely different mode of power.
That seems like a really interesting lens into like the ascetic life. The monk is is renouncing and reducing his needs and wants as a way of, well, I mean, when he does that, then he feels like he has far more power in his own experience, because other people have less, other people, or, you know, nature, or his unconscious or whatever, has less leverage over him. And also, like when you said one person, sorry about that, one person can move another person, like if one person moving another person, if the other person, their needs and wants, like you said about the government, don't include not being moved, then the one person feels like they're applying power and the other person does not feel powerless in that situation, which is...
Exactly, that's a Tai Chi move, right? So I'm going to be moved this way by the state, and neither do I, and then I see, okay, what's possible from here? You know, at a certain point, I can, and this is another interesting thing about power. We relate to what can move us in different ways. And here's a little trick. So if the tree is falling on my house, or if the tornado's coming to my house, I will move away really fast, right? But it won't piss me off in the same way as if a burglar came and ran me out of my house. And the fact that I respond to the burglar in that way disempowers me, right? Like if I respond to it like just a situation of in reality, a situation in nature, then it doesn't disempower me the same way. But it's this inability to be with the fact that other people have on occasion more power than me disempowers me. This took me a long time. I had this is a pattern in me. Like Trump got elected, many people were upset for various reasons. I'd lived through Reagan when we all just, it sounds ridiculous now, you would never know that it affected us the same way. We had no idea that someone like that could be elected, okay? So it didn't affect me the same way, but it bothered me a lot, right? And so I had to try to figure out why, because I wasn't worried for the same reasons other people worried. I wasn't, like a lot of the other things didn't bother me, but what bothered me is, it really bothers me when someone's less intelligent, cognitively complex than me, has the power to make me do things. That's really bothers me, right? Because I'm like a cognitive type, right? So now I also see that, you know, he's a man of action, but he's not driven by his own, you know, he's reactive and stuff like that. But it took me a while, like, well, what is it, Bonnie? Like, what is it? You know, and once I saw that, I was like, oh, that's it. That's it. Because to me, the way the fair world is not that there aren't people with more power, but as you rise the power, they're more intelligent, right? Like, so then, and so that's that people part, that inability to be with what is. There's something there's usually some story in the fact that we get disempowered when we're moved by other people that we don't want than if it's, you know, than if we're running away from the bison in Yellowstone Park. We loved the bison. It was like, oh my God, it was so powerful. But if that's a person moving us, then we start to have meltdown. And that's interesting to look at for different reasons.
Yeah, Bonnie, I was thinking about the ways that people have power and aren't aware of it at all, or, you know, and the ways that they are moving others and have no consciousness of it. And then of course the ways that there's unrealized power and that other people can see it so clearly. I just think that's an interesting relationship to it as well.
Yeah, and so for me, power is the felt sense of the flow of force. It doesn't make sense to say, to look at two other people, neither of whom feel the flow of force, and say there's a power thing going on there. Have to be very careful because we tend to then project. We project that someone's being coerced and maybe they're having fun. We don't know. So power is the felt sense of the flow of force in the human realm. If I am walking, you know, there's some great videos where people are walking across the street and then like two cars hit each other and the guy almost gets killed, but he didn't even know it. Well, he wouldn't have felt a power or coercion or a threat or anything, you know? And so one of the, so that's an interesting thing. You have to be really careful to, this happens a lot when we look at societies with older structures. The men have too much power, we might say, when maybe the women have the power. We don't, you know, you have to be really careful to feel what is the felt sense inside this situation. Now you could come in and many times like little dogs have all the power over the adult because there's so much projection and they're really good at instincts and getting and stuff like that. So I think if you're in relationship counseling or when you work on teams, if you can get the conversation around skills and resources, needs and wants, then you can get sort of baseline of where power's flowing. The other way we use this is someone talked about coercion up to co-creation. So if you have a large difference in skills and resources and needs and wants, then you might see, and let's say two people have a large difference in skills and resources and needs and wants, and they're coming together to do something together. It can look like structurally coercion, right? But it's actually the only kind of structure that is capable. It's the only way those two people can self-organize is because the power asymmetry is so large. Now, what that also means, so you can think of the next level up as coordinate. If you're very, very strong and I'm disabled and we want to coordinate to move something heavy, it's not going to look like coordination because the power equations are too asymmetric. So as you move up these, what we would call higher action logics, if you think about collaboration, many people are working in teams and they are saying they collaborate, but it's not true collaboration, it's distributed roles because the power asymmetries are too large. So there's a direct relationship between working on the power equations in teams in order to move up to collaboration and certainly co-creation. I can't co-create with you if we're working on software code. I don't know anything about it, you know? So a lot of times coaches and as a society, we have these words, we don't want people, you know, we want people moving into collaboration and co-creation, but it's not possible if there's too large a asymmetry in their power equations. It's just not possible. So you have to work on what is you know, called fit. The power equations have to fit the team you're building if you want these higher action logics. And too often we just think these higher action logics are a product of the values we have. No, it's not a product of the values we have. It's a product of how systems self-organize and power and trust are always part of that. They're the protocols for self-organization.
Could you say a little more about that? So you're saying that when people are collaborating or co-creating, it's not really about value alignment, it's about power asymmetry?
Yeah. So for example, it's pretty easy to see if I'm very weak or disabled and you're really strong. And we'd say, we want to coordinate on moving this very heavy thing. Even the strong person can't do it themselves. Well, it might be my value that I want to coordinate, but the power asymmetry is too skewed, right? We won't be able to coordinate our bodies. Well, it's the same is true in the information ecology. We cannot collaborate on a project if the skill asymmetry is too large or the needs and wants are out of line. You know, I need to work 3 hours a day. I don't care. I'll work as long as it takes. So to get true self-organizing collaboration, to get like team flow at these higher action logics like co-creation and true collaboration, you really have to have the right fit in the ecosystem. Or else you can, most teams that they think they're collaborating are coordinating distributed roles because there's too much power asymmetry in the ecosystem. So, you try to train up, but there's also a certain amount of reality about these higher action logics.
I've noticed a lot of folks talking about kind of a monastic approach to reducing needs and wants, or reducing the attachment to meeting needs and wants. And I'm wondering whether you've encountered, or what you would say to someone who looks at this equation and says, well then I'll just not need love or companionship, or, they might naively do a move of compartmentalizing or not feeling in order to be powerful.
Yeah, I mean, people can snooker themselves, so the need to reduce your needs can be a huge need, right? Or if you have to put all your energy into thwarting desire that arises naturally, then that's probably not very resourceful. If you can take I mean, now we're getting beyond just a simple formula, but in general, you look at needs and wants as energy for free. And then you need the skill to say, I'm going to take this energy and put it where, and put it in the direction I want it to go. That's different than just saying, I don't like the energy of need and want. I'm going to suppress it, or, a lot of these monastic academy, not monastic academy, a lot of these monastic moves are, you fast and you do all this because that will really suppress the energy of your potential. So the idea is you have this need and want, you have this energy that arises. It's energy for free. It has a certain amount of power. Then how do you take that? It's really not up to you that it comes, and put it in the direction that is like positive behavior, or toward a goal or a resource or your own potential, or the contribution you've been created to make in the world. Now that could be to be a monk. That could arise authentically in you. But if you're looking at the monk as an archetype and wishing you were that, and working tirelessly, the big giveaway is if you get more energy from it or less. And people who are like Tai Chi masters or Dzogchen Tantra teachers, they have like literally limitless energy, right? Other people, by contrast, seem disempowered or tired or distracted. And reactionary, So there is something about this that appeals to that kind of archetype, but yeah, there's 100 ways to snook ourselves. I don't think the monastic path should be prescriptive, because it's not everyone's thing. You can take, as Shinzen Young says, you nibble. He said all dharma is like bait on a hook. You want to nibble what works for you. You don't want to swallow the hook.
Bonnitta, can I ask how you would frame the giving of respect or deference in terms of a power exchange?
Yeah. So this is similar to the thought experiment on nature. If the bear is really powerful, right? You don't resent that you have to move off the path. You're kind of like, wow, that wasn't that cool, you know? But this is something that this sense of resentment when other people are powerful, and that means they move us. This is problematic. You either respect, you can both respect and try to win at the same time. But also the opposite is true. People often resent, or they'll shame themselves because they don't have as much power, right? So, yeah, did that answer your question?
Sort of. So, if I could just sort of put your answer back to you in another way and see if that's right. Would it be fair to say that respect is the allowing of that force to move between you because you feel like it was valuable to you to do so, right? So you willingly allow force to move in that direction. Is it something like that? Is that what respect would be?
Exactly. And that's if you honored your own self. Like if you allowed that force to push you over because you were mealy, you had the need to like not put the effort in, or you didn't want any pushback or something. This is not respect, right? This is being disempowered.
Yeah, yeah.
But if you played a really good game and you lost, or you're starting to play and you're like, no way I'm gonna win, you laugh at it, because it's like, I remember one time, what's his name? I'm not gonna remember. This great relief baseball player, pitcher for the Red Sox, Manny Rivera. He threw a fastball in the World Series past Jeter, and Jeter didn't even see it. And he had this biggest smile on his face because it was a thing of beauty. It was like a thing of beauty, right? This then empowers you over and over again, because you don't have all these other kind of disempowering reactions to power. You don't even want to necessarily suck up to it. Like, I get power off of this. That's not there. It's there in its own sovereignty. And that's when trust comes in, because if you can trust, there's people with that kind of power in your trust network. It no longer becomes, you don't feel the flow of the force of power. You feel the expansion of a trust network. Okay, these hours go by very fast. Hopefully there's some more to thinking about this. I offer these as, a result to not get caught up in the kind of discourse around power, postmodern discourse around power, but come back to kind of square one, and really understand what it is from a lived experience, the fundamental protocol of power, and how it manifests in different ways. I think it's easier than trust. There's less diversity. There's only like a handful of patterns I think we all share. Yeah, now I'm supposed to say something about the Stoa. The Stoa operates on a gift economy. And we receive many gifts from you, just from your presence. We hope that you feel that there's a valuable contribution coming back at you. And if you feel like you want to make a contribution, there's somehow to do that, which I don't know how it is that you do that, but I think there's a Patreon page and I'll try to get better information if I have to do this again next time. Thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.